She saved 2 wolves from the snow. She named them, fed them from her hands, watched them grow into something that made the forest go quiet. She loved them both. She never had to choose. And then one of them kissed her, and the other stepped out of the trees wearing a crown, and everything they had been. The 3 of them, the glade, the years, cracked down the middle like ice in spring. The king's face. She will never stop seeing it. The question is not who she loves. The question is, who did she love first? The light in the glade that afternoon was the color of old honey, low and sideways through the birches, the way it only came in the last breath of autumn before the cold settled in for good. Faye had her boots off. She always took her boots off in this place. Old habit, some childhood instinct that this ground was different from other ground, that it deserved the courtesy of her bare feet on its moss. The moss was cold. She didn't mind. She had her back against the great split oak that had been her landmark since she was 8 years old. A girl alone in a forest that most people in the village didn't enter past the first tree line, and she had her eyes half closed, and she was listening. She was listening to Kale. He was talking about the river. He was always talking about something. The river, the deer paths, the way the clouds had moved that morning, in a direction that meant, he said, that winter would come early this year. He sat close enough that she could feel the warmth of him without either of them touching, and his voice was low and even that particular cadence she'd known for 15 years. The white streak in his hair, the one that had been there since childhood, silver pale against the dark, wide as 2 fingers at his left temple, caught the honey light and held it. She wasn't thinking about anything in particular. She was just there, the way she was always just there with them. Present, easy, home, and then Kale stopped talking. She noticed the silence before she opened her eyes. The way you notice when a sound you didn't know you were tracking suddenly stops. The ambient hum of something familiar going absent. She opened her eyes. He was looking at her. Not the way he usually looked at her, that sideways warmth, fond and teasing and light. He was looking at her the way the forest looked sometimes at dusk, when the last of the color drained out and something older came up underneath. Kale. She said his name and it came out wrong, too soft, a question wearing the shape of his name. He reached up and his hand, careful, deliberate, the way he did everything, curved around the side of her face, his thumb at her cheekbone, and she felt the warmth of it spread down through her jaw and throat, and somewhere behind her sternum that had no name. She should have said something. She didn't say anything. He kissed her. Not tentative. Not questioning. Like he had decided, some time ago, that he would do this, and had been waiting only for the right afternoon, the right light, the right softness in her that would make it possible. His other hand came up into her hair, and she felt her breath go strange, and she thought, distantly, the way you think things that are happening too fast to catch. I have known you my whole life, and I did not know this was in you. The sound came from the tree line. Not a sound, exactly. More like the absence of wind where there had been wind, a held breath quality to the air, the way the forest goes alert before something dangerous passes through it. Faye felt it before she heard the footstep. A single footstep, deliberate and slow, on the leaf-littered ground to the north of the glade. She pulled back, she turned, he stood at the edge of the trees. For one impossible moment she thought she was looking at Kale, the same height, the same breadth of shoulder, the same face she had loved since childhood. But then her mind caught up with her eyes and she understood, the way understanding sometimes arrives not as thought but as a drop in temperature, a cold that goes bone deep. Ragnar, he wore the crown. She had heard he wore it now. She had heard it the way you hear things at a distance. News that belongs to a world you don't live in. But she had not seen it. It was not elaborate. A dark iron band set into his dark hair. Unadorned, too plain for its weight. It was the kind of crown that didn't need decoration. It announced itself by what it cost the person wearing it. His face. She would not think about his face. Not yet. She would not look at what was happening in his face, because looking at it would mean she understood it, and she was not ready to understand it. His eyes moved from Kale's hands. Still, they were still, one at her cheek and one in her hair. Kale had not moved, had gone very still the way he went still when something was about to happen that could not be stopped. His eyes moved from Kale's hands to her face. And then something happened in Ragnar's expression that she had no word for. Something that should not exist in the face of a king. Something unguarded and enormous and instantly, visibly controlled, like watching a wall go up in real time, brick by brick, except that she had seen the half-second before the wall and she could not unsee it. He didn't speak. She didn't speak. Kale's hands came down slowly from her face and her hair. He stood. He and his brother looked at each other, and the look between them was a language she didn't fully speak, had never fully spoken, in all the years she had known them. A twin language, old and private, made of shared history she was never entirely part of. Then Ragnar turned and walked back into the trees and was gone. The glade was very quiet. The honey light had shifted. Faye realized her hands were in her own lap, gripped together, and she didn't know when they'd moved there. The moss was still cold beneath her feet. She said, "How long has he been back?" Kale's voice, when he answered, was careful. 3 days. 3 days. She had not known. She had not been told. She looked at the place where the trees had closed behind Ragnar like water closing over a stone, and she felt something she could not name move through her. Not quite longing, not quite grief, not quite the particular ache of seeing someone you love in pain and knowing, with absolute certainty, that you put it there, all three maybe, braided together. Old as roots, she had found them in the snow. That was the beginning, if beginnings can be assigned to things that feel, looking back, as though they were always going to happen. She had been 8 years old, and the winter had come early that year too. Kale would have said it was the clouds, and she had been walking the forest path to her grandmother's herb stores when she heard the sound. Not a cry exactly, more like the idea of a cry, small and exhausted, a sound that had been trying to be larger and had given up. She had gone off the path which she was not supposed to do, into the deeper dark between the firs, and she had found them in a hollow beneath the roots of a fallen tree. 2 wolf pups, small enough to fit together in the cradle of her arms, which she discovered because she picked them up without thinking, another thing she was not supposed to do, and held them against her chest in the cold. They were dark-furred and shaking, and their eyes were not yet fully open, and they smelled of pine resin and cold earth, and something else, something warm and particular she couldn't name, something that made her feel, inexplicably, that she had found something that had been lost. She brought them home wrapped in her coat. Her mother had objected. Her grandmother had been less certain. Wolves, they said. The pack does not look kindly on. But they were only pups, Faye said. Only pups, and someone left them there and they would have died. And her grandmother had looked at the 2 small shaking creatures, and then at Faye's face, and made a sound that was not quite agreement but was close enough, so they stayed. She named them. Ragnar and Kale. She wasn't sure where the names came from. They had arrived whole in her mind the moment she looked at them, the way some things do, as if they had always had those names, and she was only the one who said them aloud for the first time. Ragnar for the darker one, the one that watched everything with those yellow eyes, careful and measuring even as a pup, already carrying something grave in his small chest. Kale for the other, the one that fell asleep on her feet and woke making noises of pure indignation that anything had dared to end his sleep. She raised them. She was 8 years old and she raised them. She fed them from her hands until they were large enough to hunt, which happened faster than she expected, as most things with them happened faster than she expected, as if they were always just barely containing how quickly they wanted to grow. She walked with them every day. She talked to them, because talking to them felt natural, even when they only looked at her with those tilted head expressions. Ragnar's steady and Kale's with that particular warmth, and she told them things she didn't tell anyone else. The small, ordinary things. The way the light looked on certain mornings, the words she'd been reading, the way she sometimes felt, at the edge of the forest, that the world beyond the village was very large, and she was very uncertain. They listened. They always listened. She learned them by smell before she learned them by any other way. Which surprised her later, when she thought about it, that her nose had sorted them before her eyes had. Ragnar smelled of dark earth and iron, and something ancient like stone that has held heat all day and gives it back slowly in the dark. Kale smelled of pine and open water and green things. A warmer scent, lighter, like the forest on the first true day of spring. She could have told them apart blind. She often did, in the long middle years when they had grown large enough to block a doorway, and she sometimes walked with one at each side through the village, and felt, obscurely, like something that was guarded. Which she was. She knew she was, though she didn't examine what that meant. She could have told them apart blind, in the dark, by the particular warmth of the body beside her, by the scent that reached her first. She didn't think about what that meant, either. They shifted for the first time when she was 13, and they were, she calculated, later. Something like the same age in wolf years, their equivalent of that in-between place, not quite young and not yet whatever came after. She was in the forest. They were beside her the way they always were, large and silent and warm. And then the air changed, pressure dropping the way it does before lightning, and the shapes beside her were wrong, too tall suddenly, too vertical, too human. And she stood very still while the world rearranged itself around a fact she had not known she was missing. They were not wolves. They were boys, young men, identical faces looking at her in the dim between the trees, faces she had known in fur and would now have to know in skin. And for one long, breathless moment, none of them spoke. Then Kale said, voice still rougher than it would later become, edged with the effort of the shift, "Faye, don't be frightened." And Ragnar said nothing, because Ragnar rarely said things Kale could say instead, but his eyes were on her face with that steady measuring look that had always been his, wolf or not wolf, and she understood that he was reading her the way he always read her. For fear, for the kind of fear that would be the end of something. She was not frightened. She should have been. She would think about that later, too, that she stood in the forest at 13 years old and looked at two young men who had been wolves a moment before. And what she felt was not fear, but something closer to completion. A puzzle piece dropping into a slot she hadn't known was empty. She said, "I named you wrong." Kale blinked. "Wolf names," she said. "I gave you wolf names. You probably have." She paused. "Do you have other names?" A long beat. Then Kale's mouth curved. "No." She looked at Ragnar. He shook his head, slow, and the gravity in his face cracked open just enough to let something rueful through. "Good," she said. "Then we're fine." And they were fine. For years, they were fine. The pack found them eventually. It was perhaps inevitable. Two royal-blooded shifters living feral at the edge of a borderland village. Raised by a human girl who didn't know what they were. The pack's interest was not a question of if but of when. They were 17 when the scouts came. 20 when the old Alpha King died, and the question of succession became urgent in a way that touched even the farthest borderlands. Ragnar went first. He told her he was going. He came to her in the early dark before the rest of the world was awake, and she was already awake. She had always known, somehow when he was close, that particular charge in the air the way she knew iron and earth before she saw him. And he stood at the threshold of her house, and he said, quietly, "I have to go," she said. "I know." She had known for a long time. She had known since the pack's men came and spoke to the twins in the language of the packs, which she didn't speak but could read the shape of, And she had watched Ragnar's face through that conversation and seen something happen there that was not duty, exactly, but was something duty would become if you pressed it under enough weight for enough years. A kind of necessary hardness, a preparation. He held out his hand. In his palm was a small wooden carving, a wolf, crudely made, the kind a child makes when she is learning how wood yields to a knife and has not yet learned to be subtle about it. She had given it to him when she was 9. She had forgotten she'd made it. He had not forgotten. "Keep this," he said. "I'll come back for it." She took his face in her hands. She was shorter than him now, had been for years, had to reach up, and she kissed his forehead. Not a romantic kiss, something older than that. Something that said, "I have known you since before you were what you are now. I will know you after." He left. Cale stayed another year. That year was its own thing, slow and warm and full of the particular ease of two people who have always been most comfortable together, and have more room for it now that the third has gone. She did not think about what it meant that she was easier with Cale. She did not think about what it meant that she still checked the tree line at dusk for a shape that wasn't there. She only thought about the present, which was always her defense against the parts of the future she didn't want to look at directly. Cale went eventually. He went more gently. One morning he was there, that evening he was gone, and the note he left was so warm and so specifically him that she held it in both hands for a long time in the kitchen, standing in the place where he'd always sat, and the smell of him, pine and green water, slower to leave than presence, was still in the room. 6 years. That was how long between that morning and the afternoon in the glade. 6 years in which she had lived her life in the borderlands, gardening her grandmother's medicines, trading in the village, learning to hear the forest the way she had always heard it, as a place that was hers in some way she couldn't entirely explain. 6 years of occasional news from the Pack Kingdom, each piece arriving like something from a country she had once visited and no longer lived in. The old king dead. Ragnar ascended. A new court. A harder piece than the last one. She had not let herself think too carefully about any of it. She had been, in that 6-year span, more than she wanted to admit, just waiting. She hadn't named it waiting. But when the sounds changed in the forest and the scent of pine and open water arrived before the form that carried it, and Cale walked out of the trees one late summer morning and stood in her garden with that streak of silver catching the sun, and his expression open and warm and entirely itself. She had felt something release in her chest that must have been held since the morning he left. 6 years of held breath finally let go. He had been there a month. A month of the old ease, deeper now, more deliberate, as if they were both choosing it with the added weight of years. She had thought, during that month, she had thought nothing she was going to examine here. She had been present, easy, home, and then the afternoon in the glade. She went looking for Ragnar the next morning, not because she had decided to. She had, in fact, told herself the night before explicitly that she would not go looking for Ragnar until she had thought through what she wanted to say, until she understood the knot of the night before well enough to say something that wasn't simply an attempt to put his expression back to rights, to undo the thing she had seen in his face at the tree line, because she knew herself. She knew that her first instinct with pain was to fix it, to reach into the wound and pull out the particular shard, and that instinct had served her well with most injuries and served her terribly with people she loved, because people she loved did not always want the shard removed. Sometimes they wanted to be seen holding it. She told herself all of this. She went anyway. He was at the edge of the eastern clearing, where the old packstone stood. A marker she had always known was there, but had never examined closely. A flat-topped granite boulder carved with symbols that predated her grandmother's grandmother. He was standing with his back to her, left hand resting on the stone, and the left-handedness was the detail that always caught hers last. She had to remind herself, always, even after all these years, that the hand Ragnar used was the one that looked wrong to her eye, the one that felt like a reversal, because everything about him was mirrored from KL, and she had to relearn the mirror every time. She stepped into the clearing and he said, without turning, I heard you 300 meters back. I know, she said. I wasn't trying to be quiet. He turned then. The crown was off. She hadn't noticed it was off, and the absence of it did something to his face. Made him look less like the thing he had become and more like the thing he had been. Or rather like the thing that lived underneath both. The line of his jaw was the same as Kale's. The space between his brows, which was where the tension lived when he was working to contain something, was drawn. His eyes were darker than Kale's, she had always thought. Not in color. The color was identical, but in quality. The way the same river looks different in different seasons. How long? She said. Have you been back? 3 days. Why didn't you? She stopped. His jaw shifted. Not quite an answer. Why didn't you come to the house? She said, and she kept her voice level, because some part of her was angrier than she'd known she was until the words were coming out. 3 days, Ragnar. I have a grandmother who still asks after you by. I had business, he said. You have always had business. She watched him. His left hand had moved from the stone. He was still. That is not what I'm asking. He looked at her for a long moment, and she felt the full weight of what he had been before. The wolf she had known by smell, iron and old stone, the gravity that had always been his particular quality, and also the weight of what he was now, which was different, denser, like the same metal after it has been through fire and pressure, harder but more brittle in ways she couldn't name yet. I know what you're asking, he said. Then answer it. He looked away. Not at her, not at the stone, but past her, at the tree line to the west, and she recognized the angle. She had seen it since he was a boy, the direction he looked when he was deciding whether to say the true thing. You should go back to the house, he said. We'll speak properly. There are things. He paused. There are things that need to be settled. The word settled landed wrong. It had a shape to it she didn't like, a legal quality, a word that belonged to the court rather than to the glade, or to her grandmother's kitchen, or to any of the places she associated with him. What things? Pack things. His eyes came back to her. The line between his brows deepened. Faye, please. She had never, in all her years of knowing him, been able to tell when Ragnar was lying. Not with certainty. Kale was easy to read. He went very still when he was withholding, and very warm when he wasn't. The temperature of him changed. Ragnar was different. He controlled his surface too well. But there was one tell. His voice dropped, just slightly, just a half note down, when he was saying something that was true but not complete. And his voice just now had dropped. She noted it. She filed it away. She went back to the house. The summons came 2 days later. Not a letter, a herald. A young man in the deep green livery of the pack court, with the king's seal on his and the particular expression of someone who has been given a task he does not fully understand, and has decided the safest approach is formality. He arrived at her door mid-morning while she was hanging herbs to dry from the kitchen rafters, and he said, without preamble, the Alpha King requests your presence at the new court seat. You're to be given 3 days to make arrangements and then escorted by the king's own guard. She set down the bundle of yarrow she was holding. Carefully. Requests, she said. The herald's expression flicked, just briefly. Requires, he amended. My apologies. The Alpha King requires your presence at court, indefinitely, for, he glanced at the paper he carried, as if the wording was above his comfort level, for the purposes of determining the appropriate settlement of your situation. Given your long association with the royal bloodline and the question of your status under pack law. Your situation. Your status under pack law. She looked at the herbs hanging from her rafters. She looked at the window, at the forest beyond it, the forest that was hers in the way breath is yours. Not because you own it, but because you cannot exist without it. She looked at the herald's careful, uncomfortable face. "Tell the Alpha King," she said very quietly, "that I'll come." She would come. Of course she would come. But she wanted, in that moment, to be very clear with herself that she was choosing to come, that this was her step forward onto this road, and not something that was happening to her. It mattered. She didn't entirely know yet why it mattered, but she held on to the distinction the way you hold onto the edge of something when the ground shifts. Kael found her after the herald left. He had been somewhere in the forest. She didn't ask where, didn't ask what form he'd been wearing, and he came in through the back door with forest smell still on him, pine and moving water, and he read her face immediately the way he always read her face. "He summoned you," he said. "He required me." Kael's expression shifted. Something moved through it that was more complex than his usual openness, a layer underneath. Something she would have called guilt if she'd been watching a stranger. Something she didn't fully parse because she was still holding the distinction between choosing and being moved. "Come to court," he said. "I'll be there. Whatever he has planned." "What does he have planned, Kael?" He met her eyes, and for the first time in all the years she had known him, the read she got from him was not warmth but something wary. Careful, as if he was choosing words from a smaller set than usual. "I don't know," he said. His voice was steady. His voice was always steady. But she thought of Ragnar's dropped half-note, the tell she'd catalogued over years, and she wondered. She had never wondered this before. Whether steadiness, too, could be a kind of tell. She started packing. The court seat was 4 days' ride east, where the borderlands gave way to the Pack Kingdom proper, and the trees thinned out into the open country that the Packs had held for longer than any human record could speak to. The escort the king sent was courteous without being warm. 8 guards who rode well and said little and kept a perimeter that was theoretically protective and practically containing. Though she did not say so aloud. Kael rode beside her. He talked because that was Kael, and the talking helped. The river, the sky, the quality of the light through the thinning trees. She let it carry her, the way the sound of him had always carried her, that low familiar current. And she tried not to think too hard about what waited at the end of the ride. She smelled the court before she saw it. That was not metaphor. She had always been sensitive to scent, more than most, more than could be explained by anything other than 15 years of living close to 2 wolves, whose world was organized by smell, some absorption of their way of knowing the world into her own. And the court's scent reached her on the wind a full mile before the towers came into view. Iron and old stone, which was the pack seat itself, its ancient bones. The deep green of firs massed close around the walls, tallow candles and cooking fires and horses. And underneath all of it, threaded through like a root system that the other smells grew from, the particular scent that was Ragnar's and only Ragnar's. Darker than anything else, iron and old heat and something she didn't have a word for. The smell of the stone at sundown, giving back what it held. It shouldn't have reached her this far. It shouldn't have been this strong. She kept her face forward and did not comment on it. The court was older than she'd imagined. She had built it in her head from the few descriptions she'd heard, and the real thing was both more austere and more alive than anything she'd pictured. Great walls of dark granite that had been here since the Packs first came into this country. A courtyard that smelled of horse and clean straw, and everywhere the banners of the king, deep green on black, the wolf crest centered above the gates. They were brought to a receiving hall immediately, which meant they were not given rooms first, which meant the king was making a choice about order. A protocol decision that said, "This is not a visit, this is a matter of business, and the business will be addressed before comfort is offered." She had not spent time in courts before, but she understood the grammar of it intuitively, the way she'd always understood grammar she'd never formally learned. Ragnar was already there. He was standing, not seated, which was its own statement. The crown again, the same plain iron band. He was in formal court dress, dark, well-made, nothing decorative, the kind of dress that communicates power by refusing to court attention. And he was looking at her, and his face was the face she had worked hardest to not think about since the afternoon in the glade. The one she'd seen in the half-second before the wall went up, that unguarded enormous thing briefly visible before it was controlled. The wall was up now, fully up. Beside him stood 3 pack elders, 2 men and a woman whose combined age must have been close to 250 years, and their expressions were the expressions of people who have been present for a great many difficult conversations and have developed a professional relationship with difficulty. Ragnar said, without preamble, "Thank you for coming." "I didn't feel I had much choice," she said, politely. Not aggressively. She was not feeling aggressive. She was feeling careful, the way you feel careful when the ground is uncertain. But accurately, something moved in his face. "You always had a choice," he said. "Everything I do is." He stopped. The wall flexed. "Please sit." She sat. Cacale sat beside her. The 3 elders arranged themselves like punctuation at Ragnar's sides. The elder woman spoke first, which seemed to be by established arrangement. Her name was Syorse. She had a way of speaking that made everything she said sound like it had already happened. "Your situation," she said, the same words the herald had used, "under pack law, is anomalous. You are a human woman of no pack claim, yet you are documented as having been the primary caretaker of 2 members of the royal bloodline in their formative years, and your bond with both is established enough that pack sense can detect it." "Pack sense," Faye repeated. "You carry their scent," Sorsa said directly. "Both of them. It's threaded into you. That is not something that happens without years of close proximity and—" She paused, choosing emotional significance. "Under pack law, a human who carries that kind of bond mark without formal claim attached to it creates a problem of legal ambiguity." Faye looked at Ragnar. He was looking at a point slightly past her left shoulder, which was what he did when he was waiting for something to be over. "What kind of problem?" she said. "Claim," the second elder said. He was very old, older than the woman, with the kind of stillness that comes from having said difficult things so many times that you have made peace with the difficulty. A woman carrying the scent of 2 unmated alphas, one of whom is king, creates a question of precedence. Any pack male who encounters you will understand you as marked. Marked and unclaimed it invites challenge. It creates instability. She sat very still. She was looking at Ragnar. He had not moved. "So," she said, and her voice was level. She was proud of how level her voice was. "The Alpha King summoned me to court to inform me that I am a problem of legal ambiguity." The silence in the room was its own kind of sound. "The Alpha King," Ragnar said, and his voice had dropped that half note, the one she knew, "summoned you to court so that the legal ambiguity could be resolved in a way that protects you." He looked at her now, directly, fully, with no deflection. The eye contact felt like pressure, like a hand placed on a wound. The elders advised that the matter be settled within the moon's turn, that one of the 2 alpha bonds— He paused, and the pause was very controlled, be formalized. She heard the words. She let them arrive one at a time, because they were the kind of words that needed to be taken in separately to be understood together. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that I need to choose between you, under pack law, within a month." "The law does not require you to choose," the old woman said carefully. "It requires that one of the bonds be formalized to resolve the question of claim. But one of you," she looked from Sayre to Ragnar, "will make the determination of which bond is formalized. If I don't." Sayre said nothing. The answer was in the nothing. Faye looked at Ragnar. He looked back at her, and she understood, in that moment, that the boy she had loved, the boy who had stood at her threshold in the dark, and placed a small wooden wolf in her hand and said, "I'll come back for it," had been inside this room before she arrived, had sat with these elders, had perhaps been the one who proposed the timeline. I see, she said. She stood. The chair scraped. The elder woman made a small sound of surprise. The discussion is not. I'll need to think, Faye said. I'll need air. She walked out of the receiving hall into the corridor, and she kept walking. And she did not let anything show in her face until she was around the first corner and out of sight, and then she stopped and pressed her back to the cold stone wall and breathed. The stone was cold through her clothes. She focused on that. He had come back. He had come back after 6 years, and within 3 days of arrival, he had arranged for her to be summoned, formally, to a proceeding that would settle what she was. Not as if she were a person making a choice. As if she were a question that needed answering by people with the authority to answer it. The boy she had loved had become a king, and the king had done what kings do, had picked up the thing that required managing. And managed it efficiently, with the best intentions in the world, without once stopping to ask what she wanted. She was angrier than she had expected to be. She examined the anger and found it was clean. No grief mixed into it, no hurt twined through it, just the anger, and she thought, good, that's better. That she could work with. Kale found her in the corridor. He always found her. He had always found her. Even in the forest, even in the years, when the 3 of them were young, and the world was only the glade and the village and the trees, he found her by some navigation that didn't require sight or sound. He came around the corner and stopped when he saw her face. He told you, Kale said. The elders told me, in very careful language. She looked at him. Did you know? He was quiet for a moment that was just a moment too long. Not all of it, he said. I knew he was going to settle the claim question. I didn't know. He stopped. I didn't know the form it would take. She watched him. The streak in his hair was catching the corridor's torchlight, that silver pale width at his left temple, bright as a scar. She had always loved it. She was looking at it now like evidence. Kale, she said, why did you kiss me that afternoon? Why then? He met her eyes. And this was why she had always loved him, she thought. Even in this moment, even with the particular shape of what she was asking, he didn't look away. He didn't deflect. He stood with the question the way he stood with everything that was difficult, face forward and open. Because, he said, I was afraid if I didn't, no one ever would. She held that. She held it carefully, feeling the weight of it. He was coming back, she said. I knew he was coming back. I've known for 2 months. Something shifted in Kale's face, the openness going a shade more complicated, a shade more private. Faye. You have to understand what he has done to himself. In 6 years, he took the kingship, and he gave everything that wasn't kingship. Everything. He told himself it was necessary, that the crown required it, that he couldn't be. He paused. He told himself that what he felt was a conflict of interest. The words landed carefully, each one. What he felt, she repeated. Kale's voice was very quiet. He was going to come back and manage the situation. That's what I was afraid of. That he would come back and see us and see. He gestured at the space between them, imprecise but understood, and he would manage it. Resolve it. For the pack's benefit, from behind the wall. She thought about the half-note drop in Ragnar's voice, the way he had said the words that were true but not complete. She thought about 6 years of silence. 6 years of news arriving from a distance, the pieces assembling themselves into a picture she had not wanted to examine. So you kissed me, she said, to make him react. Kale didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was the most careful she had ever heard it, careful in a way that cost him something. I kissed you because I love you. I have always loved you, Faye. That part is not a strategy. He paused. But I also, yes, I wanted him to see. I wanted to crack the wall before he could use it to manage everything. She was quiet for a long time. The corridor was cold. She could smell the fur smoke from somewhere above, and beneath it, just at the edge, just a trace, iron and old heat. The stone giving back what it held. And me, she said, Did it occur to either of you to ask me what I wanted? The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. She straightened from the wall. She smoothed her clothes. She looked at Cale, who was watching her with an expression she recognized from 15 years ago. From the day in the forest when the air changed and the shapes were wrong, and he said, "Don't be frightened," an expression of someone who is seeing a consequence arrive and is willing to stand in it. "I'm not angry at you," she said, and she meant it. "I'm not angry at him either, not entirely." She paused. "I'm angry at the part where neither of you thought to ask." She walked past him back toward the receiving hall, and she said over her shoulder, not cruelly, just clearly, "Find out where they've put my rooms. I need to sleep before I decide anything." She did not look back. She kept walking, and she felt, for the first time since the afternoon in the glade, something that was not confusion and not anger and not grief, but something that was beginning to feel cautiously like solid ground beneath her feet. 3 days at court before the thing shifted again. She learned the shape of the place. Not the layout, she had that within a day, the corridors and the courtyard, and the great hall where the pack business was done. She learned the feel of it, the way it smelled in the morning, all cold stone and fresh bread and horses, the way the light came through the narrow windows, colder than the borderland light, cleaner. The way the people here moved around Ragnar, that particular gravity, the way bodies orient toward a center even when they're pretending not to, and she watched it and thought, 6 years. 6 years of being what everything revolves around, of carrying the weight of that orienting. She had dinner with the pack elders on the second night, which was more interesting than it should have been. Circe, she discovered, had opinions about medicinal herbs that matched and diverged from her grandmother's in ways that could sustain 2 hours of conversation easily. The old woman also had, beneath her legal formality, a very dry wit and the kind of patience that came from having watched a great many young people be young and foolish and survive it. She did not mention the claim question. Neither did Faye. They talked about herbs. Ragnar was at dinner. He sat at the head of the table, which was his table, and he spoke to the elders and the senior pack members, and he did not speak to Faye. Not rudely. He was never rude. He didn't have the kind of personality that defaulted to rudeness. His coldness was too deliberate for that. He simply did not speak to her. He looked at her, twice, in the way she'd come to recognize as the look he didn't intend to give her. The unguarded one, the one that appeared for a half-second before the wall could catch it, and both times looked away when she looked back. After dinner, she walked. She couldn't sleep in the unfamiliar room, that old restlessness she'd always had in places that weren't hers, and she took a candle and went through the corridors until she found the way to the outer wall. A battlement walk, open to the sky, the stars very clear and cold, above the tree line to the west. She stood there and let the cold air come at her, and tried to feel the thing she was trying to feel. She heard him before she smelled him, a single footstep on the stone behind her. She recognized it. "I'm not going to apologize," she said, without turning, "for being out here." "I didn't come to object," Ragnar said. He came and stood beside her. Not close, 3 feet of space between them, which was careful. Deliberate, which said, "I am aware of the distance, and I am choosing it." She could smell him anyway. Iron and old stone and that other thing, the warmth underneath, the heat the stone holds through the night. "You always liked cold air," he said. And his voice was different from the receiving hall, different from the formal spaces, quieter, a full register down. The court voice gone and something older underneath. "I remember. You'd open the door of the house when it was half frozen and your grandmother would argue with you." "She never won," Faye said. "No." A pause. "She never won." She could hear the smile in it, small, rueful, genuine. She had not heard that from him since he arrived, and the sound of it did something strange to her chest, some reorganization of tension into something that was not entirely tension. "Ragnar," she said, Can I ask you something? Yes. Why a month? Silence. The elder said within the moon's turn. That was specific. That wasn't legal necessity. I've been legally ambiguous for 6 years without anyone calling a formal proceeding. So why a month? She turned to look at him. He was looking out at the tree line, the same westward angle as the clearing, the angle that meant he was deciding whether to say the true thing. What happens in a month? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, the midwinter gathering, he said, every pack leader in the 6 territories, here at this court in 1 month. He paused. If the question of claim is unresolved by then, if I arrive at that table without a declared mate, or if the legal situation around my bond with a human woman is still open and contested, it will be used as evidence that I can't settle my own house, that the king is distracted. His jaw tightened. The political cost of an unsettled claim is significant. She looked at him. She looked at his profile, the line of his jaw that was identical to his brother's, and yet, somehow, entirely his. Something in the set of it, the particular gravity, the way he held himself against the cold without moving toward or away from anything. So, she said carefully, the reason I was summoned is not that I need protection. The reason I was summoned is that you need the question settled before witnesses arrive. His jaw shifted. Both, he said. Both things are true. They are, she said, and I am glad you said so. She turned back to the tree line. Honesty is better than management, Ragnar, even when honesty is complicated. Another long pause. Then, quietly, I know. She waited. She waited through another beat of wind and cold starlight. I know, he said again, softer, and this time it wasn't about the current conversation. She understood that. She let it sit where it landed. They stood there for a while in the cold, not quite together and not quite apart. It was not comfortable, exactly. It was not the ease of the borderland forest, or the warmth of the 3 of them in her grandmother's kitchen, or any of the uncomplicated things she associated with him before the crown. But it was honest, and there was something in her that preferred honest difficulty to comfortable avoidance. She went back inside eventually. He stayed on the wall. She fell asleep that night in the cold, unfamiliar room and slept better than she had since the afternoon in the glade. The thing that changed everything happened on the 3rd day. She had been in the library. The pack court had one, small and specific, largely legal texts and histories, and what she suspected was a great deal of correspondence between pack leaders going back centuries. She had found, in a corner, a shelf of older books. Actual books, not records, and she had been sitting with one of them for an hour when the door opened. She expected Kale. She looked up and found Ragnar. He was not in the formal dress. He was in something simpler. Dark shirt, no ceremony to it. The crown absent, the formality of the court, stripped down to just him. And he was holding something. He crossed the room without speaking and stopped in front of her table and placed the object on it, beside her book. It was the wooden wolf, small, crudely made. 9-year-old hands with a knife they'd just been trusted with, learning how wood gives. She hadn't seen it since she'd placed it in his palm at her threshold. She reached out and touched it before she could think about whether to. I said I'd bring it back, he said. She looked at him. She looked at his face, the full face, no deflection. He was not looking away and she was not looking away, and the space between them was very small and very large at the same time. You kept it, she said. 6 years. I kept it since you gave it to me. Since... He stopped. Tried again. I kept it against my chest, in my coat. Through the transition and the succession and the gathering, the first year when they tried to contest the claim and... He stopped again. Something moved through his face, that enormous unguarded thing, and this time it was slower. And this time he let it be slower, didn't wall it off. I kept it. It was the most. His voice dropped. Not the lying drop. Not the incomplete truth drop. Something else. Something rawer. It was the thing I kept. She picked up the carving. It was warm from his body. She held it in both hands and she thought about the threshold, the dark, the way he'd looked in the pre-dawn, already carrying the kingship like something he'd been practicing for. Already wearing the gravity he would wear for the next 6 years. She thought about the things she'd given him, without knowing she was giving him anything that mattered. 9 years old with a knife, making a small imperfect wolf because she loved wolves, and he had kept it against his heart through a decade of impossible things, and never once told her. She thought about the information asymmetry that had always existed between them, the gap that ran under all their years. The things they had felt and not said, the distances they had created to manage feelings they hadn't named, and how those gaps had accumulated into something that looked, from the outside, like restraint but she was beginning to understand its own kind of cruelty. The slow cruelty of not saying. "Ragnar," she said. "Yes, sit down." He sat. He sat across the table from her, and the library around them was very quiet, and she looked at his face, this face she had known in fur and in skin, and in the dark, at thresholds and in formal receiving halls, and at a distance of 3 feet on a frozen battlement, and she said, "I am going to ask you something, and I need you to answer me. Not from behind the wall. She paused, just as yourself. Can you do that?" A very long pause. "I can try. Why didn't you come back sooner?" His eyes moved to the table, to the carving between her hands. Back to her face. "Because," he said, and his voice was doing the raw thing, the thing she hadn't heard before. "I knew that if I came back, I would want things I don't have the right to want." "The right," she repeated. "You weren't Pack. You had no obligation to." He stopped. "And Kale loves you. He has loved you openly the way I never." Another stop. The line between his brows was very deep. "I told myself that the right thing was to stay away. That my wanting was a conflict of interest. That a king doesn't. Ragnar." She waited until he looked at her. "That is a very well-constructed story you've been telling yourself." He looked at her. "It has duty in it, and sacrifice, and the correct-sounding reasons. And none of it is a lie, exactly." She set the carving down on the table between them, "but none of it is what you actually mean." The wall flexed. She watched it flex. And then, slowly, something gave way behind his eyes. Not the wall exactly, but the effort of holding it. And what was underneath was not what she had expected. She had expected pain, which was there. She had expected want, which was also there. But beneath both of those was something simpler, something almost like fear. And she had not thought, in all her years of knowing Ragnar, that he was afraid of anything. "I didn't come back," he said very quietly, "because I was afraid you would choose him. And then I would have to watch it. And I didn't know if I could watch it and remain." He stopped. The sentence did not finish. He did not finish it. She sat with what was unfinished. She let it sit. She didn't reach into it to pull the shard out. "And the proceeding," she said. "The elders. The month." He looked at her steadily. "I wanted you here. I told myself it was legal necessity." A pause. "It is legal necessity, but I also wanted you here." She stood up. She walked around the table, which she did not plan. Her body moved, and she followed it. And she picked up the carving, and she held it out to him. He took it, and when their fingers were both on it, she said, "I know you kept this. I know what that means, and I know what you've been doing with your own heart for 6 years, and I know that you arranged a legal proceeding as a way of bringing me here, because you couldn't simply say, 'Please come.' I know all of that." She held his gaze. "And I need you to know that I know it, before we talk about anything else." His fingers closed around the carving, around her hand. He did not move, did not pull her closer, didn't take advantage of the small distance between them. He just held her hand around the small wooden wolf, and she felt the warmth of him. Iron and old stone and that deeper warmth underneath, the heat the stone holds, and she stayed. "Faye," he said, just her name, like a question and an answer at once. "I know," she said. The days that followed were not simple. Nothing. She had long since learned became simple simply because the hidden things were named. Kale knew something had shifted. He could read it in her the way he read everything, the temperature change of her, and he did not press her for detail. But he was quieter than usual. The talking's less constant, a watchfulness in him that was different from his usual warmth. She appreciated the quiet. She also knew what it cost him. She spent time with both of them, separately. Kale in the mornings, when he walked the perimeter of the court in his customary way, checking scents and sightlines with the same instinct he'd had since he was a pup in her grandmother's house. She walked with him, and they talked about small things, real things, the kind of talking that doesn't require resolution. Ragnar in the afternoons, usually in the library, or sometimes on the battlement walk, and those conversations were different. Slower, more careful, with long silences that were not uncomfortable. Silences that had something working through them. She was not choosing. She knew she was not ready to choose. She also knew she couldn't not choose indefinitely. The moon was moving, and then, 11 days into her time at court, the brothers fought. She didn't witness the beginning of it. She heard it, or rather, she heard the silence that preceded it. That same held-breath quality she'd recognized in the glade. The pressure drop that meant something dangerous was moving through the air. She was in the corridor outside the great hall, and she heard the silence, and then she heard Ragnar's voice, low and controlled and colder than she'd ever heard it. She went in. They were in the center of the hall, the great fire burning at the far end, and they were standing close. Too close, alpha close, the kind of proximity that in a pack context was pure aggression, a territorial crowding that was more dangerous than distance. Ragnar was left hand forward, which she registered in the way she always registered it, the small correction her mind made. Kale's hands were open at his sides, which was not submission. She knew him well enough to know that, but restraint, active, effortful restraint. She stopped in the doorway. "Told you," Kale was saying, and his voice was flat in a way she had never heard it. All the warmth burned off down to the load-bearing structure. "That I kissed her because I love her. Not because I was making a move. Not because I was." "You knew I was coming back," Ragnar said, cold, clipped. "You knew I was coming back, and you knew what it would mean for her legally, and you did it anyway without telling her why, I told her." Kale's jaw. "2 days ago I told her. After. You told her after." Something moved in Ragnar's face past the cold, something that was not quite anger and not quite grief. "She asked why, and you told her after she already knew the shape of it. That is not what, Ragnar?" Kale's voice changed, not louder, harder. The load-bearing structure showing its material. "That is not what you would have done? You who brought her here under a legal summons, because you couldn't say I missed her? You who arranged an entire proceeding around your own inability to just..." He stopped. Started again. "We have both been making decisions for her. That is what I said. I said that." Ragnar was silent. "I told her." Kale said, quieter now, "that neither of us asked. That was the truth. I'm not claiming I was right. I'm claiming that at least I told her." A long silence. The fire at the end of the hall made its sound, the soft percussion of wood giving way. Ragnar said, "You kissed her to force my hand. Yes. That is using her. Yes." Kale's voice cracked on it, just slightly, just enough. "I know that. I have known that since I did it. And I would..." He stopped. When he continued, his voice was raw, and raw on Kale was devastating in a way she hadn't expected, because she had never heard it before. "I would do it again. Because the alternative was watching you come back here and manage everything from behind the wall, and end up alone because you decided that was the noble outcome. I would do it again, and I hate that about myself, and I told her so." A longer silence. She stepped out of the doorway and into the room. Both of them turned. They saw her at the same time, and the effect was the same. A stillness. A reaching of the expression toward some more controlled version of itself. The instinct to manage what she saw in their faces. "Old habit," "Stop," she said. "Both of you. Stop doing that thing with your faces." Neither of them spoke. "Sit down," she said. They sat. Not at the table. There was no table in the middle of the great hall, only the two chairs that were there for ceremony. And they each took one, and she stood between them, which felt right, which felt like the position she had always occupied and was only now naming. She looked at Ragnar first. "You are right that what he did was not entirely clean. He knows that. He told me himself." She looked at Kale, "And you are right that what Ragnar has been doing, the management, the legal architecture, the 6 years of absence, was its own kind of decision-making for me. He knows that too." She paused. "The thing neither of you seems to have fully reckoned with is that I am in the middle of all of this, and I am not a problem to be solved or a question to be answered by the right application of honor or strategy." Her voice was very steady. She was proud of that. "I am the person who has to choose, and neither of you has let me." The fire, the silence. "So," she said, "here is what is going to happen. I am going to take the next 3 days, and I am not going to talk to either of you about this. I am going to walk. I am going to think. And at the end of 3 days, I am going to tell you what I have decided, and whatever I decide, both of you are going to accept it. Not as a legal resolution, not as a pack precedent, as my choice." She looked at them both. "Do you understand me?" Ragnar said, "Yes." Kale said, "Yes." She nodded. She turned and walked out of the great hall, and she did not run, and she did not look back. The forest near the court was not her forest. It was older, denser, its own creature. The trees here were larger than anything in the borderlands. Firs so tall their tops were lost in the winter pale sky. The undergrowth thick with fern and old root. She walked into it the morning after the fight, and she felt, as she always felt when she entered real forest, the particular unclenching she couldn't achieve indoors. She walked a long time. Hours. She crossed a stream she didn't know the name of, followed it east until it bent south, found a ridge above the valley where the court lay below her, small and dark against the white-gray sky. She sat on a stone and looked at it. She thought about Ragnar. The iron and stone smell of him, the weight of him beside her on the battlement, the half-note drop in his voice that she had catalogued over years without understanding that what she was cataloging was the shape of his love for her. Or not love, exactly, not a word she would name yet, but the space love inhabits before it's said aloud. She thought about the wooden wolf, against his heart, 6 years, the thing he kept. She thought about Kale. The warmth of him, the steadiness of it. Not the steadiness of something that doesn't move, but the steadiness of a river, which is always moving but never gone. She thought about 15 years of being found by him, in the forest, and in the kitchen, and in corridors, and in conversation, the ease of it, the kiss in the glade, which had been inevitable and warm, and also, she could admit this now, a little bit sad, in the way things are sad when they are also very good, when they close one door even as they open another. She thought about what it meant to love someone, the shape of the word. She had been told, in the one life she had lived before this particular 3 days, that love was the feeling, that you felt it or you didn't, that it arrived and declared itself, and you either recognized it or you missed it. She was no longer sure that was right. Love seemed to her, sitting on a cold stone above a valley that held 2 men she had raised from wolves, to be less like an arrival and more like an orientation. A direction you were already facing, most of the time, without knowing what you were facing toward. She had been facing both of them for 15 years. That was the truth. She had never had to choose because she had never had to look at the direction she was facing and name it. And the avoidance had been comfortable, and comfortable avoidance was its own kind of harm. Sire Say had not said that, but she was saying it to herself now, on a cold stone in an unfamiliar forest, and she heard it with the clarity of something that has been true for a long time and is only now being said aloud. On the 2nd day, she encountered the wolves. She had wondered if she would. She had been aware, in the way she was always aware of them, of being tracked, not aggressively, not hunters tracking, but the protective circling she had known since she was 8 years old, and they had first begun to expand their range. She had been aware of it the way you're aware of your heartbeat, usually at the edge of consciousness, present and foundational. They emerged from the trees separately. KL first, from the east. Dark fur with that paler patch at his left temple, the only difference from their youth being the scale, the enormous contained power of the adult wolf, and even now the scent reached her ahead of him. Pine and open water, spring morning. He did not approach. He sat. He watched her with those steady, warm eyes, and she looked back at him and felt the pull of it, the 15 years of it, the warmth that was real and had always been real. Ragnar came from the north, and she knew him before she saw him. She knew him the way she had always known him. Not by the pale patch that was absent, not by the left forward set's pause, but by the smell of him, iron and old stone, and that deep underneath warmth, the heat the stone holds through the dark. He was bigger than she remembered, or perhaps she had been remembering the young wolf rather than this. This enormous, dark-furred presence, the gravity of him, the careful, deliberate way he moved through the trees as if he knew the weight of himself and was responsible for it. He stopped 10 feet from her. He didn't sit. He stood. And he looked at her, and the wolf's eyes were the same as the man's. That same quality, darker than Kale's in that seasonal river way, deep and knowing. And she felt her breath do something strange. She had always known them by scent. She had always known. And standing here, between them, in the cold of the unfamiliar forest with the valley below and the pale sky above, she understood something she had been keeping at the edge of her understanding for a very long time. Her body had known. The answer her body had known. That particular warmth, the involuntary thing, the breath and the pull and the awareness that predated thought. It was not a new thing. It was the oldest thing. She looked at Ragnar. The wolf looked back. She said quietly, "I know." The wolf was very still. "I know," she said again. "I've known for longer than I admitted. That's not an accusation. That's just what is." She sat down on the ground, which was cold and damp, and she didn't care, and Kale came and lay beside her on her left, and the warmth of him was real and familiar and true. And Ragnar walked forward slowly, carefully, and lay down before her. Not beside, not like Kale, but with his enormous dark head in her lap, the weight of it heavy and warm, and completely, terrifyingly trusting. And she put her hands in the fur of his neck, and she felt something release in him that must have been Zinslied for 6 years. She sat with both of them in the cold forest until the light changed. She came back to court on the 3rd day. The moon's turn was now 2 weeks away. The midwinter gathering was its own clockwork, ticking down in the background of everything else, and she was aware of it, but she did not let it rush her. She had a thing to say, and she was going to say it in the right order, or none of it would be right at all. She asked to speak to the elders first. Sawers received her in the small room off the great hall, alone, the other 2 elders absent by Sawersi's private arrangement. She understood, looking at the old woman's face, that she had been expected, that this conversation had been anticipated. Sarse poured 2 small cups of something warm, set one in front of Faye, and did not speak. "Tell me," Faye said, "what the law actually allows." Sarse raised an eyebrow. "The law requires—" "Tell me what the law allows," Faye said. "Not what the king described, not the political reading. What the law actually allows for a woman in my situation, in the full text of the Pack Charter." Sayorse was quiet for a moment. Something moved in her face that might have been approval, or might have been the satisfaction of a person who has been waiting for the right question. She reached into the stack of papers on the table beside her and withdrew one, and she began to read, and Faye listened. When she was finished, Faye sat with it. "So," she said, "the law allows me to refuse both claims entirely and remain unclaimed, with a formal declaration of my status as a ward of the court. which would resolve the legal ambiguity without requiring a bond. It allows it, Cersei said. The political implications. I'm not asking about the political implications, Faye said. I'm asking what the law allows. Yes, Cersei said simply. The law allows it. And the law allows a claim to be made by choice, Faye said, without the king's formal arrangement, without a proceeding by the simple declaration of the parties. Yes, Cersei said again. Then the proceeding was not necessary, Faye said. Sayori set down her papers. She folded her hands. The proceeding, she said, was what the king requested. I advised him that other paths were available. She paused. He wanted legal architecture. He is more comfortable with it than with open ground. Faye thought about iron and old stone, about the warmth underneath, the heat held through the dark, about a man who expressed love as legal management because he hadn't been taught that anything else was permissible. Thank you, she said. She found them both in the great hall. They had not planned to be together. She could see from their faces when she entered that they had arrived separately and found each other in the middle, and were in the process of tolerating proximity. Ragnar was standing by the fire. Kale was at the window. When she entered, they both turned, and the way they both turned was so identical. The same angle, the same speed, the same precise attention, that she wanted, ridiculously, to laugh. She stood in the center of the room, between fire and window, and she said, I'm going to tell you both something, and I need you to listen without interrupting, and then I'm going to tell you what I've decided. Neither of them interrupted. I have loved you both, she said, my whole life, in different ways and with different parts of myself. Kale, you have always been the easiest thing in my life, the warmth I return to, the person who found me, always. And that is real, and it has always been real, and it will not stop being real. She looked at him. He was very still. His face open in that way, the load-bearing structure visible and undefended. What you did in the glade was not only strategy. I know that. And what you admitted to me afterward, the cost of admitting it. I saw what that cost. I see it. She turned to Ragnar. He had not moved. The fire behind him. The crown absent, as it often was now when she saw him. She had started to notice that the crown came off more frequently, that in her presence he was working towards something that wasn't managed. And you, she said. You kept a wooden wolf against your heart for 6 years. You arranged a legal proceeding because you couldn't say, please come. You have been so afraid of wanting me that you have been running from me in place, which is the most exhausting kind of running. She paused. And you lay your head in my lap in a cold forest and let me see what lives underneath the wall, and I did not know until that moment how long I had been waiting to see it. The fire, the silence, the smell of pine and iron and cold stosen, both of them here in this room, the three of them back in the same space they had always occupied. She took a breath. I know what I want, she said, and I want both of you to understand that this is my choice. Not because a legal proceeding required it, not because a moon's turn is running out, not because either of you arranged it. Mine. Do you understand? Yes, Kale said, quietly. Yes, Ragnar said, quieter still. She walked forward. She stopped in front of Ragnar first because some things must be in the right order, or they mean the wrong thing. She looked at his face, this impossibly familiar face that she had been learning and relearning for 15 years, the gravity in it, the wall that was still there but thinner, cracked in places by cold air and a cold forest, and a wooden wolf pressed to a chest that held more than duty. I choose you, she said, his face. It was not like watching the wall go up. It was the opposite. It was watching something go down that had been up for so long that the going down was more seismic than the going up had ever been. She felt it in the air between them, this release, this unmanning of everything he had been holding. And she watched his eyes, and she did not look away, and she did not explain it. She let it be what it was. He reached up slowly, both hands, left and right. Left first, because he was left-handed. because that was the mirror that was only his. And he took her face in his hands, and he looked at her for a long moment in which neither of them moved, and then he put his forehead down to hers. Just that. Forehead to forehead. The weight of him, the warmth underneath all the iron, the breath of him warm on her face. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, she turned. She could feel the shape of Cale behind her in the room without looking. 15 years of knowing his particular warmth, his particular presence, and she turned toward it because she could not turn toward it. He was standing by the window, and his face was something she would not soon forget. Not broken, she had been afraid, turning, that she would find it broken, and she was wrong about that, as she had sometimes been wrong about what he could bear. He was not broken. He was aching, which was different, which was survivable and was honest, and he was looking at her with the full force of 15 years of loving her, and not looking away from what it cost. She crossed the room to him. She took his face in her hands, the same gesture, and he let her, and she kissed his forehead, the same as the threshold, the same as the thing that was older than romance, and she said quietly, for only him, "You found me every time. You will always have found me. That doesn't change." He was very still for a moment. Then his hands came up and covered hers, and he held them there, against his face, for a breath that was longer than a breath, and she felt him choose to hold it and then choose to let it go. The choosing visible, the dignity of it, the enormous quiet courage. His hands dropped. She stepped back. He nodded once, and the nod was whole. He looked past her, at his brother, and the look between them was the twin language she had never fully spoken. Old, private, made of shared history she was not entirely part of, but this time she could read a piece of it. She could read the shape of the thing that passed between them, the grief and the love and the long, complicated, surviving bond of two people who had been each other's first and most essential fact. They had bent, they had not broken. The midwinter gathering came, and she stood beside Ragnar at the great table, and the pack leaders came from 6 territories, and they looked at her and read what she was. Human, uncanny with her scent sense, carrying the bond mark of the king in a way that was felt before it was said, and the political calculations that had been Ragnar's fear showed themselves to be complicated, as political calculations always are, and were navigated, as complicated things always are, imperfectly and with effort and with the particular steadiness that comes from knowing what you are doing and why. Sorse sat at the end of the table and said very little and missed nothing. Cale was there too, at the table but not beside the king. At the far end, among the borderland representatives which he had requested himself, which was the right thing, and the right distance, and the right shape of beginning to build what they would become to each other in the years after the choice. Not nothing, not what they had been, something new that they were both learning the grammar of. She learned the court. She learned the pack language properly, which took months and was never fully finished, but progressed faster than anyone expected, because she had spent 15 years learning everything she needed about wolves by smell. She walked the perimeter with the guards, and told them things about the forest they hadn't known, and they learned to listen to her. She argued with Sawersi about medicinal herbs twice a week, and called it winning when they arrived at the same conclusion by different roads. And Ragnar. He was never simple. She had not chosen him because she wanted simple, and the crown did not simplify itself simply because she was present, and there were days when the court and its demands made him cold in ways she had to learn to recognize as exhaustion rather than distance. She learned to recognize it. She learned to walk into the library in the late afternoon and set a cup of something warm near his left hand and not require anything of him for an hour. And she learned that what he needed most was someone who could be present without demanding performance, and that was the one thing she had always been able to do. He gave her, in exchange, the thing she hadn't known she needed, the depth of being known, Not the warmth of being found, which was Cale's gift and remained Cale's gift, but the depth of being seen by someone who had been watching her carefully and without motive for 15 years, who knew the shape of her silences and the difference between the fear that closes and the fear that moves forward, who kept a small wooden wolf against his heart not because she had made it well, but because she had made it. She asked him, one evening on the battlement walk, the stars very clear above the firs. Winter by then, the real cold, the cold that had weight to it. She asked him, when did you know? Not the legal proceeding, not the management of it. When did you know what you felt? He considered it. The stars moved slowly behind him. I was 14, he said. You were teaching me how to read human, the written language. You sat beside me and you guided my finger along the letters and you smelled like... He paused. Like yourself. Like the particular thing you smell like. And something in me arranged itself around that. I didn't have words for it. I had 14 years, and I had a wolf's instincts, and I understood, without language, that I had just encountered something I would organize the rest of my life around. She thought about a 14-year-old wolf boy sitting beside her in her grandmother's kitchen learning human letters, already carrying something he wouldn't name for 12 more years. And you said nothing. I was 14, he said, with the ghost of something almost wry. You were 13. I was also a wolf, and you were a human girl, and I had not yet been given the context to understand what that meant or didn't mean. He paused. And then I had context, and the context was more complicated, and the dry sound again, rueful, real. I became very good at management. She leaned against the wall beside him, the cold stone through her coat, his left hand near hers on the parapet, not quite touching. You're not good at it anymore, she said. No, he said. I find I'm terrible at it recently. She took his hand, left to right, her right hand covering his left, and she felt his fingers turn under hers and take hold, and the warmth of it went up through her palm and wrist and somewhere behind her sternum that she had still not named, that she suspected did not need a name. Below them the court went about its winter business, candlelight in the windows, the sound of the evening guard change, horses and cold air, and the deep green smell of furs. Above them the stars were the same stars that had been above the borderlands, above the glade, above the hollow, in the roots of the fallen tree where she had found 2 shaking pups, and picked them up without thinking. She had not thought about it then. She had only felt the cold and the warmth of them and understood, at 8 years old, that she had found something that had been lost. She understood it again now, differently, as one understands things again after they have moved through the mill of years and come back to themselves transformed. She had found something. She had held it. She had learned every shape of it. And when the time came, her choice, the choice that was hers, and no one else's, she had chosen the direction she was already facing. There was one more thing. One small thing, which happened a week after the gathering, which she was only going to mention. Because it was the kind of thing you carry forward, the kind of thing that matters quietly for years. She went to the library and she made a new carving. Her hands were better now, 23 years and more practice than she'd had at 9, and the knife was good, and the wood was a piece of dark oak from the fallen tree, at the edge of the quartz forest that she had asked for specifically. She worked for 3 evenings, alone, and when she was finished she had 2 wolves. Not 1, 2. She kept one. She left the other on Ragnar's desk in the library, beside his papers, and she did not say anything about it, and he did not say anything about it for 2 full days. And then on the 3rd evening, he came and found her on the battlement walk, and he put his forehead down to hers, and neither of them said anything at all, because some things don't require language. The language came later, as it does. The language always comes later, if you leave enough room for it, if you stop filling all the silence with management and strategy and the architecture of things that don't need to be built. The forest knew them. The glade knew them. The stone of the court held their warmth as the stone holds all warmth, quietly through the dark, waiting to give it back. Kale, that spring, walked back out of the borderlands and into his own next thing, and she watched him go, and the watching was something she had to hold very carefully, and she held it. He looked back once, at the tree line. He raised one hand. She raised one hand back, and then the trees took him, pine and open water and green things, the spring morning smell of him, and she let him go with the particular love that doesn't require proximity to remain love. She still smells them both sometimes. In the forest near the court, in the early morning when the air is clear and cold. Pine and open water from the west, where the borderlands are. Iron and old stone beside her. She knows them without looking. She has always known, and that, my loves, is the story of two wolves, and the girl who raised them, and the impossible, uncanny, hard-won thing she did when the time came to choose. If you have ever loved someone so much you forgot to love yourself first, if you have ever been the person caught between two truths, both of them real, and had to find the third thing, the thing that was yours, then I think you know something of what Faye carried into that great hall. The choosing never stops costing, but it begins to give something back. That is, perhaps, what choices are for. Stays close to this place. If these stories find something in you, there are more fires to sit beside, more cold forests to walk through, more men who must learn to kneel before they can stand beside someone as an equal. Every story we tell here is a story about that, the choosing and the courage of it, and what lives on the other side of it, warm and surprising and yours.